The Dyatlov Pass incident. The frozen mystery of the Ural Mountains. A 3+ hour investigation into the unsolved death of 9 Soviet hikers. 9 experienced hikers, one mountain pass. A night so cold it stopped their hearts. They were the best of the best. Elite ski tourists from the Soviet Union's premier technical university. They had conquered mountains, crossed frozen rivers, survived blizzards. They knew the mountains better than anyone. And yet, on February 2nd, 1959, they all died. Their tent was found sliced open from the inside. Their footprints showed they ran into the snow without shoes, without coats, without any protection from temperatures that dropped to 40 below zero. Some died of hypothermia, but others had their skulls crushed, their chests caved in, their eyes and tongues removed by something that wasn't human. The Soviet government called it a compelling natural force, but they buried the files for 30 years. This is the Dyatlov Pass incident, the most mysterious mass death in Russian history, and today we're going to find out what really happened. Andrew here, for Permanent Underclass, where we explore the weird stuff your therapist would tell you to avoid. The "oh cool, now I'll never sleep again" side of reality. If you're easily scared, easily offended, or easily anything, you're in the wrong place. Today, we're going deep into one of the most puzzling, unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. 9 experienced hikers died on a mountain in the Soviet Union in 1959. And more than 60 years later, we still don't know exactly what happened. But here's what makes this story so compelling. We have almost all the evidence. We know where they went, what they ate, what they wore. We have their diaries, their photographs, their footprints in the snow. We have their bodies and the forensic reports. And still, we don't know. That's what makes the Dyatlov Pass incident so terrifying. Not that there's no evidence, but that there's too much evidence, and none of it adds up. We're going to go through this case piece by piece. We'll look at the hikers, their journey, the discovery, the theories, and the modern attempts to solve it. By the end, you'll know more about this case than almost anyone. Let's begin. Part 1. The hikers. Who were these people? To understand what happened, we need to understand who these people were. These weren't amateurs, these weren't tourists, these were the cream of the Soviet ski touring crop. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineering student at the Ural Polytechnical Institute in Sverdlovsk, now known as Yekaterinburg. Dyatlov was experienced. He'd completed multiple difficult expeditions and was working on his highest certification level, Grade 3. Which was the most demanding in the Soviet Union at the time. The other 8 members were equally qualified. They were all students or recent graduates of the same institute. They had all passed rigorous physical and technical tests. They were all experienced ski tourists who had completed expeditions in the Ural Mountains before. The group's original roster included 10 people, but one, Yuri Yudin, had to turn back on January 28th due to knee and joint pain. He had several health issues, including rheumatism and a congenital heart defect. He would be the only survivor of the group. The remaining 9 were Igor Dyatlov himself, the leader who had designed the route, Yuri Doroshenko, 21, an experienced skier, Lyudmila Dubinina, 21, of only 2 women in the group. She was known for her determination and physical strength. Georgy Krivonishenko, 23. He was called Yura by his friends. Alexander Kolovatov, 24. He was the youngest member in terms of experience level, but still highly qualified. Zenaida Kolmogorova, 22. She was the other woman in the group. Known for her cheerful personality. Rustem Slobodin, 23. He was a talented photographer who documented many of the group's adventures. Nikolai Thibault Brignol, 23. He had a background in mountain climbing and was working on his instructor's certification. Semyon Zolotaryov, 38. He was the oldest member of the group, an experienced mountaineer who was working on his master's certificate in ski instruction. His presence in the group was somewhat unusual. He had originally been assigned to a different expedition, but somehow ended up with Dyatlov's group. These were not reckless teenagers. These were serious, experienced, well-trained outdoor enthusiasts. They knew how to survive in the mountains. They had the best equipment the Soviet Union could provide. They had studied the weather, the terrain, the risks. And they still died. Part 2. The Journey. What they planned. The expedition was supposed to be a celebration. It was planned to coincide with the 21st Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the most important political event of the year. The route they planned was named in honor of this occasion. Their goal was to reach Mount Otorten, which in the Mansi language means, "do not go there." This was a fitting name for a mountain that had claimed lives before. The route was designed by Dyatlov himself. It would cover approximately 190 miles across the northern Urals through some of the most remote and dangerous terrain in the Soviet Union. This was a Category 3 expedition, the highest difficulty level at the time. The group set off from Sverdlovsk on January 23, 1959. They traveled by train to Ivdel, a town at the center of the northern province. From there, they took a truck to Vijay, the last inhabited settlement to the north. On January 27th, they began their trek toward Gora Otorten. The weather was brutal. Temperatures were dropping, snowstorms were common, and visibility was poor. But the group pushed on. Yudi left on January 28th due to his health issues. The remaining 9 continued. By January 31st, they had reached the edge of a highland area. They cached surplus food and equipment in a wooded valley, supplies they would need for the return journey. And then they made a decision that would prove fatal. Part 3. The Fatal Decision. Why they camped where they did. On February 1st, the group started moving through the pass. They had planned to get over the pass and make camp on the opposite side, but the weather was worsening. Snowstorms reduced visibility to near zero. They got lost. Instead of reaching the planned campsite on the other side of the mountain, they found themselves on the eastern slope of Kholat Syakhl. The name of this mountain, in the Mansi language, means dead mountain. When they realized their mistake, they faced a choice. They could descend 1.5 kilometers to a forested area that would have offered shelter from the wind, or they could stay where they were. They chose to stay. Why? Yuri Yudin, who had left the group earlier, speculated that Dyatlov did not want to lose the altitude they had gained, or he decided to practice camping on the mountain slope. This seems insane to us, camping on an exposed slope in a snowstorm, but we need to understand the context. These were experienced mountaineers. They knew about avalanches. They knew about wind chill. They knew about the dangers. But they also believed they could handle it. They erected their tent on the open slope. They dug out a level area for their sleeping bags. They cooked dinner. They wrote in their diaries. They took photographs. They had no idea that in less than 12 hours, 8 of them would be dead, and the 9th would spend the rest of his life trying to understand why. Part 4. The Discovery. What searchers found. The group's planned return date was February 12th. When that date came and went with no word, their families grew worried. Delays were common on such expeditions, but this was getting ridiculous. On February 20th, the families demanded a rescue operation. the head of the institute organized the first search parties, consisting of volunteer students and teachers. Then the army and police got involved. Planes and helicopters joined the search. On February 26th, a student named Mikhail Sharavin found the tent. What he saw baffling investigators to this day. The tent was half torn down and covered with snow. It was empty. All the group's belongings and shoes had been left behind. But here's the creepy part. The tent had been cut open from the inside. The hikers hadn't fled because of an attacker outside the tent. They'd fled from something inside the tent, something so terrifying that they would rather face the freezing cold than stay inside. Investigators found 9 sets of footprints in the snow. They were made by people wearing only socks, a single shoe, or even barefoot. These footprints led down the slope toward the edge of a nearby wood, 1.5 kilometers away. After 500 meters, the tracks were covered by fresh snow. At the forest's edge, under a large Siberian pine tree, the searchers found the first bodies. 2 of them, Krivonishenko and Doroshenko, shoeless, dressed only in their underwear. The branches on the tree were broken up to 5 meters high, suggesting one of the hikers had climbed up to look for something, perhaps the camp. Between the pine tree and where the tent had been, searchers found 3 more corpses, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin. They were found at distances of 300, 480, and 630 meters from the tree. Their poses suggested they had been trying to return to the tent. These 5 bodies were found within a month of the incident, but there were 4 more hikers unaccounted for. Part 5. The last 4 found under the snow. Finding the remaining 4 travelers took more than 2 months. They were finally discovered on May 4th under 4 meters of snow in a ravine 75 meters further into the woods from the pine tree. These 4 were found in dramatically different conditions than the first 5. For one thing, they were better dressed. Some clothing from those who had died first had been removed for use by the others. Dubinina was wearing Krivonishenko's burned, torn trousers. Her left foot and shin were wrapped in a torn jacket. This suggests that some of the hikers survived long enough to try to help each other. They weren't dead immediately. They had time to think, to act, to try to survive. But what they died from was horrifically different. Part 6. The injuries. What killed them? This is where things get really strange. The first 5 bodies showed no signs of violence. The medical examination concluded they had died from hypothermia. They had frozen to death in the sub-zero temperatures. Simple, tragic, but understandable. But the last 4 told a different story. 3 of them had fatal injuries that couldn't be explained by exposure or falls. Thibaut Brignol had major skull damage. His skull was fractured with damage so severe that the forensic expert called it comparable to that of a car crash. Dubinina had severe chest trauma. Her ribs were broken. Her chest had been crushed by an enormous amount of force. Zolotaryov also had major chest fractures, the same kind of massive internal damage. According to Boris Vozrojdeny, the forensic expert who performed the autopsies, the force required to cause such damage would have been extremely high, and notably, the bodies had no external wounds associated with the bone fractures. It was as if they had been subjected to intense pressure without being hit by anything. But there's more. 4 bodies found at the bottom of the creek, in running water, had soft tissue damage to their head and face. Dubinina was missing her tongue, her eyes, part of her lips, and a fragment of her skull bone. Zolotaryov had his eyeballs missing. Kolovatov was missing his eyebrows. The forensic expert judged that these injuries happened post-mortem. The bodies had been in the water, and animals or the moving water had caused this damage. But here's what's disturbing. Why were they in the water at all? Why were 4 bodies found in a creek, 75 meters from where the others were found? And what caused those massive chest and skull injuries? Part 7. The official investigation. What the Soviets concluded. The Soviet government took this case seriously. This was the Cold War, and the last thing the Soviet authorities wanted was a story about Soviet citizens dying under mysterious circumstances that might suggest incompetence or cover-up. An official inquest started immediately after the first 5 bodies were found. The investigation team, led by Lev Nikitich Ivanov, worked the case for months. They considered many possibilities. They interviewed the Mansi people, the indigenous reindeer herders who lived in the area. Could they have attacked the hikers? The investigation concluded no. Only the hikers' footprints were visible, and they showed no sign of hand-to-hand struggle. They tested for radiation. Some levels were found on one victim's clothing. This could be explained by the Kishtim disaster, a nuclear incident that had occurred 2 years earlier. One of the hikers had lived in the contaminated zone, and another had helped with the cleanup. They analyzed the tent, the footprints, the bodies, the circumstances, and in May 1959, they closed the case. Their official conclusion: a compelling natural force had caused the deaths. The inquest ceased due to the absence of a guilty party. The files were sent to a secret archive. For 30 years, that was it. Case closed. No answers. Part 8. The strange details. What doesn't add up. Let me tell you about the details that have haunted investigators and amateur sleuths for decades. First, there's the radiation. Just traces on some clothing. Not enough to kill anyone. But why was it there at all? Was it connected to their deaths or just a coincidence from their everyday lives? Second, there's the footage from Krivonishenko's camera. The negatives were kept in the private archive of one of the investigators, Lev Ivanov. His daughter donated them to the Dyatlov Foundation in 1997. What do these photographs show? We'll get to that. Third, there's the strange orange spheres. Another group of hikers, about 50 kilometers south of the incident, reported seeing strange orange spheres in the sky to the north on the night of the incident. Similar spheres were observed in Ivdel and adjacent areas continually during February and March 1959 by various independent witnesses, including the Meteorology Service and the military. These sightings were not noted in the 1959 investigation. The witnesses came forward years later. Why didn't the original investigators follow up on this? Fourth, there's the behavior of the authorities. When Lev Ivanov's team reported that they had seen flying spheres, he received direct orders from high-ranking regional officials to dismiss this claim. Why would they do that? Fifth, there's the condition of the bodies. Yuri Kuntsevich, who was 12 years old at the time and later became the head of the Dyatlov Foundation, attended 5 of the hikers' funerals. He recalled that their skin had a deep brown tan. This is unusual for frozen bodies, which typically go pale or gray. Sixth, there's the timing. The hikers died 6 to 8 hours after their last meal. This suggests they were active, awake, and alive for some time after the initial incident. And seventh, there's the clothing. Although the temperature was low, about minus 25 to minus 30 degrees Celsius with a storm blowing, the dead were only partially dressed. Some had only one shoe, while others wore only socks. These details don't prove anything, but they raise questions. And questions lead to theories. Part 9. The first theory, the avalanche. The most straightforward explanation is also the one that made the most sense to investigators: an avalanche. The theory goes like this. The hikers were awakened by the sound of a snow slab avalanche beginning to form or actually hitting their tent. In a panic, they cut their way out of the tent. The cuts were made from inside, and fled down the slope to escape being buried. They ran without proper clothing because they didn't have time to dress. They were focused on survival, not warmth. Once they were out of immediate danger, they tried to make their way to the trees for shelter. Some made it, some didn't. This theory explains why they left the tent. It explains the cuts in the tent fabric. It explains why some were barefoot or lightly dressed. They were sleeping when the avalanche hit. In 2020, Russian authorities officially reopened the investigation and concluded that an avalanche was the most likely cause. A study led by scientists from EPFL and ETH Zurich, published in 2021, suggested that a type of avalanche known as a slab avalanche could explain some of the injuries. The 2020 investigation reconstructed the events as follows. On February 1st, the group erected their tent on an open slope without natural barriers. A heavy snowfall with strong wind and frost had persisted for days. The group traversing the slope and digging a tent site into the snow weakened the snow base. During the night, the snowfield above the tent started to slide down slowly under the weight of the new snow, gradually pushing on the tent fabric. The group woke up and started evacuation in panic. With the entrance blocked, they escaped through a hole cut in the tent fabric and descended the slope to find safe ground. This seems logical, but there are problems. Part 10. Problems with the avalanche theory. Arguments against the avalanche hypothesis include: the location of the incident did not have any obvious signs of an avalanche having occurred. An avalanche would have left certain patterns and debris distributed over a wide area. More than 100 expeditions to the region have been held since the incident, and none ever reported conditions that might create an avalanche. A study of the area using up-to-date terrain-related physics revealed that the location was entirely unlikely for such an avalanche. An analysis of the terrain and the slope showed that even if there could have been a very specific avalanche in the area, its path would have gone past the tent. The tent had collapsed from the side, but not in a horizontal direction. Dyatlov was an experienced skier, and Zolotaryov was studying for his master's certificate in ski instruction and mountain hiking. Neither of these men would have been likely to camp anywhere in the path of a potential avalanche, and most importantly, footprint patterns leading away from the tent were inconsistent with someone running in panic. All the footprints were consistent with individuals walking at a normal pace. If there was an avalanche, why were they walking calmly instead of running? The avalanche theory explains some things, but not everything. Part 11. The infrasound theory. One of the most popular theories comes from Donnie Icar's 2013 book Dead Mountain. Icar investigated the incident extensively and proposed that wind going around Kholat Shakal created a Kármán vortex street, which can produce infrasound capable of inducing panic attacks in humans. Infrasound is sound at frequencies below 20 Hz, below what human ears can normally hear, but our bodies can still feel it. Infrasound can cause feelings of unease, panic, and even hallucinations. According to Icar's theory, the infrasound generated by the wind, as it passed over the top of the mountain, was responsible for causing physical discomfort and mental distress in the hikers. Because of their panic, the hikers were driven to leave the tent by whatever means necessary and fled down the slope. By the time they were farther down the hill, they would have been out of the infrasound's path and would have regained their composure. But in the darkness, they would have been unable to return to their shelter. The traumatic injuries suffered by 3 of the victims were the result of their stumbling over the edge of a ravine in the darkness and landing on rocks at the bottom. This is an interesting theory. It explains the panic that drove them from the tent. It explains why they made seemingly irrational decisions. But there's no direct evidence that infrasound was present that night, and it doesn't explain the massive chest injuries that couldn't have been caused by falling. Part 12. The military theory, parachute mines. Another theory suggests that the hikers were caught in a Soviet military exercise involving parachute mines. This theory alleges that the hikers, woken by loud explosions, fled the tent in a shoeless panic and found themselves unable to return for supplies. After some members froze to death attempting to endure the bombardment, others commandeered their clothing only to be fatally injured by subsequent parachute mine concussions. There are indeed records of parachute mines being tested by the Soviet military in the area about the time the hikers were there. The glowing orange orbs that witnesses reported seeing in the sky could have been military aircraft or descending parachute mines. This theory uses scavenging animals to explain Dubinina's injuries. And parachute mines do produce signature injuries similar to those experienced by the hikers. Heavy internal damage with relatively little external trauma. But this theory has problems too. The Soviet military would have known about the hikers' expedition. They would have been informed of the route. Why would they conduct an exercise in an area where hikers were known to be? And if there were explosions, why didn't other groups in the area report hearing them? Part 13, the UFO and ball lightning theory. Some have proposed that the hikers encountered a UFO or ball lightning. The strange orange spheres seen in the sky that night could have been something other than military equipment. They could have been extraterrestrial craft or natural atmospheric phenomena. Ball lightning is a real phenomenon, a glowing sphere that appears during thunderstorms and can move unpredictably. It's rare and not fully understood. If ball lightning had entered the tent, it could have caused panic and forced the hikers to flee. But this theory doesn't explain the massive injuries. Ball lightning doesn't crush chests or fracture skulls. And while UFOs are a popular explanation for the unexplained, there's simply no evidence to support this theory. The spheres seen in the sky were observed by other groups as well, and those groups survived just fine. Part 14. The Yeti and Mansi Theory. One of the oldest theories involves the indigenous Mansi people, or Yeti creature. The Mansi are reindeer herders who have lived in the northern Urals for centuries. They're known to be peaceful, and the investigation ruled them out. There were no tracks suggesting anyone else had approached the tent. The Yeti theory is more sensational. Could some creature have attacked the hikers? Could a local legend have become real? The problem with this theory is that there's no evidence of any animal attack. There were no animal tracks. The injuries don't match any known animal attack pattern. And the massive chest and skull injuries are definitely not consistent with any animal attack. Part 15. The paradoxical undressing. One physiological phenomenon that may explain some of the strange clothing choices is called paradoxical undressing. When someone is experiencing severe hypothermia, they may feel suddenly and intensely hot. This can cause them to remove their clothing, even in freezing temperatures. It's called paradoxical undressing because it seems to go against logic. Some researchers have suggested that this is why some hikers were found with minimal clothing. They weren't fleeing in a panic without time to dress. They had undressed because their dying brains told them they were too hot. But this doesn't explain everything. Some hikers had clearly added clothing from those who had died earlier, suggesting they were thinking clearly enough to try to stay warm. And paradoxically, undressing typically happens in the late stages of hypothermia, when death is imminent. The timeline of events doesn't seem to match this. Part 16. The Katabatic Wind Theory. In 2019, a Swedish-Russian expedition to the site proposed that a violent katabatic wind was a plausible explanation for the incident. Katabatic winds are downslope winds that occur when cold air flows down from high elevations under the force of gravity. They can be extremely violent, reaching hurricane force. The topography of the Dyatlov Pass area is similar to locations where katabatic winds have killed hikers before. In 1978, at Unsolved Mountain in Sweden, 8 hikers were killed by such winds. The expedition proposed that a sudden katabatic wind would have made it impossible to remain in the tent. The most rational course of action would have been to cover the tent with snow and seek shelter behind the tree line. This theory explains why they left the tent. It doesn't fully explain the injuries, though. Part 17. The radiation connection. Let's talk more about the radiation that was found on some of the clothing. The Soviet Union had experienced several nuclear incidents in the 1950s. The most famous was the Kyshtym disaster of 1957, which was the third worst nuclear accident in history. Some areas remained contaminated for decades. One of the hikers, Zinaida Kolmogorova, had lived in the contaminated zone near the Mayak nuclear facility. Another, Nikolai Thibault Brignol, had helped with cleanup efforts at a nuclear test site. Their clothing showed traces of radiation, but it was minimal, not enough to cause illness or death. Some have speculated that this radiation was connected to the incident. Perhaps there was a secret nuclear test that went wrong. Perhaps the hikers stumbled onto something they shouldn't have seen. But the radiation levels were too low to be the cause of death. And other hikers who hadn't been near contamination zones died just as easily. The radiation is a strange detail, but it doesn't seem to be the key to the mystery. Part 18. The photographs. What the camera saw. One of the most intriguing aspects of the case is the photographs found near the tent. Krivonishenko's camera survived, and its negatives provide a glimpse into the group's final days. The photographs show the hikers setting up camp, cooking meals, and preparing for their journey. They're smiling, relaxed, unaware of what's coming. But there are also strange photographs taken in the dark after the incident. These show the tent from outside, and the interior of the tent. Some show what appear to be footprints in the snow. The last photographs are the most disturbing. They're blurry, dark, and show shapes that are difficult to identify. Some researchers believe they show the aftermath. The empty tent, the scattered belongings, the bodies. But others see something else in these photographs. Something that suggests a presence. Something that can't be explained. Part 19. The Survivors. Yuri Yudin. Yuri Yudin was the only member of the original group to survive. He left the expedition on January 28th due to health issues, missing the final fatal days. He spent the rest of his life trying to understand what happened to his friends. He became a prominent member of the Dyatlov Foundation, working to preserve the memory of the dead hikers and to continue investigating the case. In interviews, Yudin expressed his belief that the group made a fatal error in choosing their campsite. He also questioned the official investigation, believing that more could have been done to determine what happened. Yudin died in 2013, at age 76. He never got the answers he was looking for. Part 20. The Family's Fight. For decades, the families of the victims pushed for answers. They demanded that the case be reopened. They formed the Dyatlov Foundation to keep the memory of their loved ones alive. In 2019, their persistence paid off. Russian authorities reopened the investigation. A team led by Deputy Prosecutor Andrei Kuryakov traveled to the site in winter 2019. They took measurements, surveyed, photographed, and conducted experiments. Using photogrammetry of pictures taken in 1959, they tried to establish the precise location of the tent. The investigation concluded in 2020 with the avalanche theory. Kuryakov stated, "It was a heroic struggle. There was no panic, but they had no chance to save themselves under the circumstances." But many families remain unsatisfied. They believe there are questions that haven't been answered. The avalanche theory doesn't explain everything. Part 21, The Scientific Study, 2021. In 2021, a team of physicists and engineers from EPFL and ETH Zurich published a groundbreaking study in communications, Earth, and environment. Led by Alexander Puzrin and Johann Gaume, the study demonstrated how even a relatively small slide of snow slab on the Kholat-Syakhl slope could cause tent damage and injuries consistent with those suffered by the Dyatlov team. Their models showed that a slab avalanche could have created a powerful air blast that hit the tent without burying it. This could have caused the tent to collapse and created the conditions for the traumatic injuries found in 3 of the victims. This is the most rigorous scientific analysis of the case to date. It provides a plausible physical mechanism for many of the observed phenomena, but it still doesn't explain everything. Part 22, Why Do We Care? The Allure of the Mystery. Why does this case continue to fascinate us more than 60 years later? I think it's because of what it represents, the limits of our understanding. We have evidence, we have theories, we have scientific studies, and yet we still don't know for certain what happened. The Dyatlov Pass incident is a reminder that the world is stranger than we think. It challenges our assumptions about our ability to explain everything. It shows us that even with modern science and investigation, some mysteries remain unsolved. There's also something primal about the fear. These were experienced outdoors people who died in conditions that should have been survivable. They had a tent, they had skills, they had each other, and still they died. What were they so afraid of that they would flee into a snowstorm without shoes? What made them choose certain death outside over the possibility of survival inside? We don't know. And that not knowing is terrifying. Part 23, The Cultural Impact, Movies, Books, Games. The Dyatlov Pass incident has become a cultural phenomenon. It's been the subject of books, documentaries, movies, and video games. The 2013 horror film Devil's Pass was inspired by the incident. The 2015 video game Kholat is explicitly about the case. Numerous documentaries have been made, including the Russian The Mystery of Dyatlov Pass in 2000. The incident has also inspired countless internet theories and investigations. Reddit threads, YouTube videos, and online forums are full of people trying to solve the case. This cultural impact keeps the story alive. Each new generation discovers the mystery and adds their own theories. Part 24, The Unanswered Questions. Let's end with the questions that remain. What exactly caused the traumatic injuries to 3 of the hikers? The avalanche theory provides a mechanism, but is it definitive? Why did they cut the tent from the inside? Was it panic, or was there another reason? What were the orange spheres in the sky? Military exercises, natural phenomena, or something else? Why did the Soviet government suppress information about the incident? What were they hiding? What caused the radiation on some of the clothing? A coincidence or something more sinister? And finally, if they had not made the decision to camp on that slope, would they have lived? These are questions that may never have answers, and that's what makes the Dyatlov Pass incident so compelling. It's a mystery wrapped in a tragedy, surrounded by questions that refuse to be answered. Outro. The end. The Dyatlov Pass incident happened in February 1959. 9 experienced hikers went into the mountains. Only one came out alive, and he left before the fatal night. More than 60 years later, we're still talking about what happened on that mountain. We've had investigations, theories, scientific studies. We've had books, movies, documentaries. We've had countless hours of speculation and debate, and still, we don't know for certain what happened. The Russian government says it was an avalanche. Some researchers say it was infrasound. Others say it was military exercises, or a secret weapon, or something supernatural. But here's what we do know. 9 people died on that mountain. They died in conditions that shouldn't have been fatal for experienced hikers. They died with injuries that can't be fully explained, and they've been dead for more than 6 decades. The mountain still stands. The pass still bears their name, and the mystery still endures. Maybe one day someone will find a piece of evidence that solves this case. Maybe one of the files will be declassified. Maybe one of the survivors will have a revelation. But maybe not. Maybe some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. I'll see you next time, if you dare. Sweet dreams. Part 25. The photographs in detail. What the camera captured. Let's take a deeper look at what those photographs actually show, because they're one of the most eerie aspects of this case. The camera was found near the tent, along with the film negatives. The photographs span the last days of the expedition, showing the hikers in high spirits, confident in their abilities, excited about their journey. But there are also photographs taken after the incident. These are different. These show the tent in daylight, standing but clearly damaged. They show the interior of the tent, sleeping bags thrown around, equipment scattered, signs of hasty departure. And then there are the night photographs. These are blurry, poorly lit, almost incomprehensible. They seem to show shapes in the darkness. Some researchers have spent hours analyzing these images, trying to identify what they depict. One photograph shows what appears to be a figure standing on the mountain slope in the dark. Another shows a strange light source. Another shows the tent from an unusual angle, as if someone was circling it. Are these photographs evidence of something else that happened that night? Were there other people on the mountain? Or are these just the normal artifacts of a camera in poor visibility? The photographs cannot answer these questions. They can only raise them. Part 26. The autopsy reports. Forensic details. The forensic reports from the autopsies are chilling documents. They paint a picture of a slow, agonizing death for some of the hikers. Let's look at each victim individually. Igor Dyatlov died of hypothermia. His body showed no traumatic injuries. He was found 630 meters from the campfire, in a pose suggesting he had fallen exhausted while trying to return to the tent. Yuri Doroshenko died of hypothermia, found at the pine tree near the fire pit, only wearing underwear. His body showed signs that he had tried to warm himself by the fire. Georgy Krivonishenko died of hypothermia, found at the same location as Doroshenko. The two had clearly been together at the end. Zenaida Kolmogorova died of hypothermia, found between the tree and the tent. She had clearly been trying to return to the camp. Rustem Slobodin died of hypothermia, found 300 meters from the tree. He had a small crack in his skull, but this was not considered a fatal wound. These 5 died from exposure. They froze to death in temperatures that dropped to minus 40 degrees Celsius. They were inadequately dressed. They couldn't find their way back to the tent. They succumbed to the cold. But the other 4, Nikolai Thibault Brignol, died from a fatal skull injury. His skull was fractured in multiple places. The force required would have been comparable to a car crash. No external wounds. Lyudmila Dubinina died from internal bleeding caused by severe chest trauma. Her ribs were broken. Her chest had been crushed by enormous force. No external wounds. Semyon Zolotaryov died from severe chest trauma. Same pattern as Dubinina. Massive internal damage without external injury. Alexander Kolovatov died of hypothermia. Found with the other three, better dressed than the others. The forensic expert Boris Vozrojdeny was puzzled. He stated that the force of the blows had been too strong and no soft tissue had been damaged. This was not consistent with any human attack. It was as if they had been subjected to enormous pressure from all sides simultaneously. What could cause such injuries? A fall? A rock slide? A compacting of snow? Or something else? Part 27. The timeline, minute by minute. Let's reconstruct what likely happened that night based on the evidence. 6 p.m., approximately. The group finishes setting up camp. They cook dinner, write in their diaries, prepare for sleep. 10 p.m. to midnight, the group goes to sleep. The weather is bad. Snow, wind, cold. Sometime after midnight, exact time unknown. Something wakes the hikers. It could have been a sound, a feeling, a physical sensation. They realize they are in danger. The hikers cut their way out of the tent. The cuts are made from inside, using knives. This takes time. This is not a panicked instant reaction. It's a deliberate choice. The hikers flee the tent. They are poorly dressed, some in socks, some in underwear, some with only one shoe. The temperature is minus 25 to minus 30 degrees Celsius. They run down the slope toward the tree line. They are 1.5 kilometers from the tent. In normal conditions, this would be a difficult walk. In a snowstorm, in the dark, in their condition, it becomes a death march. Around the pine tree. Some hikers stop here. They build a small fire. Two of them, Doroshenko and Krivonishenko, are in such poor condition that they cannot continue. They stay by the fire, perhaps hoping the others will return with help. 3 hikers, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin, try to return to the tent. They have slightly better clothing, but not much. They want to get sleeping bags, supplies, help. They never make it. They fall, one by one, in the deep snow. They are found at distances of 300, 480, and 630 meters from the tree. The remaining 4, Dubinina, Kolovatov, Zolotaryov, and Thibaut Brignol, continue into the forest. They find a ravine, a stream. They try to build a shelter. Perhaps they dig into the snow. At some point, something collapses. Perhaps their shelter. Perhaps the snow above them. Perhaps something else. They are found 2 months later, under 4 meters of snow, in the creek bed. This reconstruction raises questions. Why did they leave the tent? What was the threat that made them choose certain death outside over the possibility of staying inside? Part 28. The Soviet Cover-Up. What they knew. The Soviet government's handling of this case has always been suspicious. Why were the files classified? Why did they suppress information about the orange spheres? Why did they conclude the case so quickly? Some researchers believe the Soviets knew more than they admitted. Perhaps they were conducting secret military tests in the area. Perhaps the hikers stumbled onto something they shouldn't have seen. Perhaps the compelling natural force was actually a weapons test gone wrong. The radiation on some clothing could support this theory. The orange spheres could have been test aircraft or missiles. The suppression of information could have been to hide a military secret. But there's another interpretation. The Soviet Union in 1959 was a paranoid society. Information was routinely classified, even when there was nothing particularly secret about it. The suppression of the orange sphere sightings could have been routine censorship rather than a cover-up. And the conclusion, a compelling natural force, could simply have been the honest assessment of investigators who had no better explanation. We may never know what the Soviet authorities knew or didn't know, but their handling of the case has fueled conspiracy theories for decades. Part 29. The Modern Investigation: What Changed? In 2019, the Russian government finally reopened the case. This was due in large part to the persistence of the victims' families, who had been demanding answers for 60 years. The new investigation was led by Andrei Kuryakov, a deputy head of the regional prosecutor's office. He organized a winter expedition to the site, the first such expedition in decades. His team took measurements, surveyed the terrain, photographed the location. They used photogrammetry of the original 1959 photographs to try to determine the exact position of the tent. Based on this investigation, they concluded that an avalanche was the most likely cause. They argued that the hikers had made a mistake in selecting their campsite, and that a snow slab had broken loose, forcing them to flee. Kuryakov stated, "It was a heroic struggle. There was no panic, but they had no chance to save themselves under the circumstances." This was the official conclusion, but it didn't satisfy everyone. Part 30. Scientific Critique of the Avalanche Theory. The avalanche theory has been challenged by various researchers, including some who have visited the site. Keith McCloskey, who has researched the incident for many years, noted several problems with the avalanche theory. First, there were wide discrepancies in distances quoted between different possible locations of the snow shelter where the last 4 hikers were found. The actual location has never been definitively established. Second, the location of the tent near the ridge was found to be too close to the spur of the ridge for any significant buildup of snow to cause an avalanche. Furthermore, the prevailing wind blowing over the ridge blew snow away from the edge of the ridge on the side where the tent was. Third, the topography of the most likely location of the snow shelter does not match the photos taken at the time of the search in 1959. These are technical objections, but they suggest that the avalanche theory may not be as settled as the Russian authorities suggest. Part 31. The Infrasound Theory: Scientific Analysis. Let's examine the infrasound theory more carefully. The idea is that wind flowing over the mountain created a Kármán vortex street, which generated infrasound at frequencies around 1 to 10 Hz. This infrasound could cause feelings of panic, anxiety, and even hallucinations in humans. The theory has some scientific basis. Infrasound is known to cause discomfort in some people. There have been reports of infrasound at concerts causing feelings of unease. Some researchers have linked infrasound to reported ghost sightings. But there's a problem. We don't know if this actually happened on the night of February 1st to 2nd, 1959. We don't have measurements of the wind conditions, the atmospheric conditions, or the infrasound levels. We can't prove that infrasound was present. And even if it was, it doesn't explain the traumatic injuries. Panic might drive someone out of a tent, but it doesn't crush their chest or fracture their skull. The infrasound theory is intriguing, but it's incomplete. Part 32. The Military Theory: Evidence for and Against. Let's examine the military parachute mine theory in more detail. The evidence for this theory includes records of Soviet military exercises in the area in early 1959. Parachute mines were indeed tested in the northern Urals. The glowing orange spheres observed by multiple witnesses. These could have been descending parachute mines. The unusual injuries: internal trauma without external wounds. Parachute mine detonations can cause this type of injury. The suppression of information. The Soviet government may have wanted to hide a military accident. The evidence against the theory includes: why would the military conduct exercises in an area where hikers were known to be? The route was approved, the dates were known. Military planners should have been aware. Why would the parachute mines cause injuries hours after the initial explosion? If it was an airburst, the effects would have been immediate. Why weren't there more witnesses to the explosions? Other groups in the area should have heard something. The military theory is intriguing, but it raises as many questions as it answers. Part 33. The radiation. Deeper analysis. The radiation on some of the clothing has been mentioned in most accounts of the case, but it deserves deeper analysis. The contamination was found on clothing belonging to Kolmogorova and Thibaut Brignol. The levels were low, not enough to cause radiation sickness or death. Kolmogorova had lived in the contaminated zone near the Mayak nuclear facility, where the Kishtim disaster had occurred in 1957. She may have carried contamination on her clothing from her home region. Thibaut Brignol had participated in cleanup operations at a nuclear test site. He could have been contaminated in the same way. This seems like the most plausible explanation. The radiation was incidental, not causal. It wasn't what killed them. But why did the Soviet investigators include this information in their files if they weren't investigating it as a cause of death? Perhaps they were thorough. Perhaps they were suspicious. Perhaps they were as puzzled as we are. Part 34. The last 4 bodies, the ravine. The discovery of the last 4 bodies in May 1959 was a grim affair. The snow had melted enough to reveal what had been hidden all winter. They were found in a ravine, 75 meters from the pine tree, where the first 2 had been discovered. They were under 4 meters of snow. They had been there since February. The condition of these bodies was different from the first 5. They were better dressed. They had taken clothing from the dead. They had clearly tried to survive, but their injuries were horrific. 3 of them had died from traumatic injuries, consistent with massive force. Their chests were crushed. Their skulls were fractured. How did they get these injuries? Some researchers suggest they fell from a height, perhaps the edge of the ravine, and landed on rocks below. Others suggest they were caught in an avalanche or snowslide that buried them. The position of the bodies suggests they were in a stream of running water. This could have contributed to the soft tissue damage seen in Dubinina and others. But there's something else. The location of these bodies was very close to where the others had been searching. If they had called out, if they had made any noise, the searchers in February might have heard them. They didn't. They were silent. They were dead. Part 35. The last moments. What they experienced. Let's try to imagine what those final hours were like for each group. For Doroshenko and Krivonishenko at the pine tree, they were barely dressed. They were freezing. They built a fire, but it wasn't enough. They likely realized they weren't going to survive. They may have talked to each other, remembered their lives, thought about their families. Then they died, together, holding on to each other for warmth that never came. For Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin trying to return to the tent. They were inadequately dressed, but not completely helpless. They walked into the darkness, searching for their shelter. They must have known it was hopeless. They must have kept going anyway, hoping to find warmth, supplies, survival. One by one, they fell. Their bodies were found in poses suggesting they had simply given up and laid down in the snow. For Dubinina, Kolovatov, Zolotaryov, and Thibaut Brignol in the ravine, they were better dressed. They had some clothing from the dead. They tried to build shelter. Then something happened. A collapse, a fall, an avalanche. They were buried under 4 meters of snow. They died in darkness under tons of white earth, alone. This is a tragedy, not a mystery of supernatural causes, but a tragedy of human error, bad decisions, and brutal nature. Part 36. Why didn't they stay in the tent? This is the question that haunts everyone who studies this case. They had a tent. They had sleeping bags. They had each other. Even if there was an avalanche threat, even if there was infrasound, even if there were strange noises, why not try to wait it out? One possibility, they thought they were in immediate danger. The threat, whatever it was so terrifying that they would rather face certain death in the cold than stay inside. Another possibility, they were confused. The infrasound theory suggests they weren't thinking clearly. They made a rational decision based on irrational perceptions. Another possibility, there was something in the tent with them. This is the most terrifying theory, and the one that fuels the conspiracy theories. But there's no evidence to support it. We'll never know for certain. But the question remains, what could have driven experienced hikers to choose death over staying where they were? Part 37. The Legacy for Hikers. The Dyatlov Pass incident has become a cautionary tale for outdoor enthusiasts around the world. It teaches important lessons about mountain safety. First, location matters. The hikers chose a dangerous campsite. They were exposed to the wind, to the snow, to the elements. Experienced hikers know to look for shelter, to avoid exposed ridges, to think about what could go wrong. Second, preparation matters. The hikers had adequate equipment for a normal expedition, but not for an emergency. They didn't have enough clothing to survive outside. They didn't have a way to signal for help. Third, decision-making matters. The hikers made a series of decisions that night that led to their deaths. Some of these decisions were reasonable at the time, some were not, but they all contributed to the outcome. This case is studied in mountaineering schools and outdoor training programs. It reminds us that even experienced professionals can make fatal mistakes. Part 38. The Families Fight for Truth. For 60 years, the families of the victims have been fighting for answers. They've formed organizations, conducted their own investigations, and pressured the government to reopen the case. Yuri Kuntsevich, who was 12 when the incident occurred, became the head of the Dyatlov Foundation. He spent his adult life trying to find out what happened to his friends. The families have been frustrated by the government's handling of the case. They believe there are questions that haven't been answered. They believe the avalanche theory doesn't explain everything. In 2019, their persistence paid off. The case was reopened. But the result, another avalanche theory, hasn't satisfied them. The family's fight continues. They want answers. They want closure. They want to know what really happened on that mountain in 1959. Part 39. The Cultural Phenomenon. The Dyatlov Pass incident has become more than a mystery. It's become a cultural phenomenon, inspiring books, films, games, and countless discussions. Why do we keep coming back to this story? I think it's because it represents the limits of human understanding. We have evidence, science, investigation. We have theories and counter-theories, and still we don't know. It's also because of the human element. 9 real people died real deaths. They had families, dreams, futures. They were cut down in their prime, in a place they loved, doing something they were passionate about. And finally, it's because of the questions. What were they so afraid of? What really killed them? What happened in those final hours? These questions may never be answered, and that's what keeps us coming back. Part 40. Comparisons to other cases. The Dyatlov Pass incident is often compared to other unsolved tragedies. The Yuba County Five in California in 1978 is sometimes called the American Dyatlov Pass. 5 men died under mysterious circumstances while traveling through the mountains. Some of the same mysteries surround both cases. Why did they leave their vehicle? Why were they inadequately dressed? Why did they die in ways that don't make sense? The Kamar-Daban incident in 1993 was another Russian tragedy. 6 hikers died under mysterious circumstances in the Siberia region. Some of the same questions surround this case. There are others. All over the world there are cases of people dying in the mountains under circumstances that don't make sense, but the Dyatlov Pass incident remains the most famous, the most analyzed, and the most mysterious of these cases. Part 41. The media coverage. How the story spread. For years, the Dyatlov Pass incident was virtually unknown outside the Soviet Union. The files were classified. The story was suppressed. Then, in the late 1980s, with the opening of Soviet society, the story began to emerge. Books were published, documents were released. The outside world learned about the tragedy. In the 1990s and 2000s, the story went global. Donnie Icar's book Dead Mountain brought the case to an English-speaking audience. Documentaries were made. The story spread across the internet. Today, the Dyatlov Pass incident is one of the most famous unsolved mysteries in the world. It has fans, researchers, and conspiracy theorists around the globe. This media coverage has kept the story alive. It's also created legends and misinformation. It's hard to separate fact from fiction at this point. Part 42. What would have saved them? Let's end with a practical question. What could have saved them? If they had camped lower on the mountain, in the trees, they would have been sheltered from the wind. The avalanche, if there was one, might not have reached them. If they had stayed in the tent, even without proper clothing, they might have survived until morning. They could have dug themselves out, repaired the tent, and continued. If they had stayed together, rather than splitting into groups, they might have been able to help each other. There was strength in numbers. If they had not been so confident in their abilities, they might have recognized the danger signs earlier. They might have turned back. These are lessons for all of us who venture into the mountains. We are not invincible. We are not beyond danger. We must respect the power of nature. Part 43. The investigation's lasting questions. Let's summarize the questions that remain. What caused the hikers to flee the tent? What were they so afraid of? What caused the traumatic injuries to Thibaut Brignol, Dubinina, and Zolotaryov? What were the orange spheres seen in the sky? Why did the Soviet government suppress information? Why did some hikers undress while others added clothing from the dead? What really happened in the ravine, where the last 4 were found? These questions may never have answers, but they're worth asking. Part 44. Conclusion. The mystery endures. The Dyatlov Pass incident happened in February 1959. It's been more than 60 years since 9 experienced hikers died on a mountain in the Soviet Union. We've had investigations, theories, scientific studies. We've had books, movies, documentaries. We've had countless hours of speculation and debate. And still, we don't know for certain what happened. The Russian government says it was an avalanche. Some researchers say it was infrasound. Others say it was military tests, or UFOs, or something supernatural. But here's what we do know. 9 people died on that mountain. They died under mysterious circumstances, and their deaths have haunted us for more than 60 years. The mountain still stands. The pass still bears their name, and the mystery still endures. Maybe one day, someone will find evidence that solves this case. Maybe one of the files will be declassified. Maybe one of the survivors will have a revelation. But maybe not. Maybe some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. I'll see you next time, if you dare. Sweet dreams. Part 45. The Ural Mountains, Geography and History. To understand the Dyatlov Pass incident, we need to understand where it happened. The Ural Mountains form a natural boundary between Europe and Asia, stretching over 2,500 kilometers from the Arctic Ocean to the Kazakh steppes. The northern Urals, where the incident occurred, are particularly remote and dangerous. The mountains are not particularly high. The highest peaks reach only about 1,600 meters, but they are exposed, windswept, and brutal in winter. The climate is harsh. Temperatures can drop to minus 40 degrees Celsius or lower. Snowstorms can appear suddenly, reducing visibility to zero. The wind creates wind chill that makes already cold temperatures feel even colder. The area is sparsely populated. The Mansi people, an indigenous group, have lived in these mountains for centuries, but they are outnumbered by the vast forests and empty spaces. In winter, the northern Urals are almost completely abandoned. The few settlements that exist are small, isolated, and far apart. If something goes wrong, help is a long time coming. This was the world the Dyatlov group entered in January 1959. They were experienced hikers, but even experienced hikers can underestimate the dangers of this environment. Part 46. The Mansai People. Legends of the Mountain. The Mansai people have lived in the northern Urals for centuries. They're reindeer herders and hunters, adapted to surviving in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Their name for the mountain where the incident occurred is Kholat Syakhl. In their language, this means dead mountain. The name alone suggests that this place has been considered dangerous for a very long time. The Mansi have their own legends about the mountain. They tell stories of spirits, of otherworldly beings, of places where humans should not go. Some researchers have tried to connect these legends to the incident, suggesting that the Mansi knew something about the mountain that the Soviet hikers did not. But the Mansi themselves have consistently denied any connection to the tragedy. Their tracks would have been visible in the snow. There was no evidence of anyone else on the mountain that night. The Mansi legends add to the atmosphere of mystery that surrounds the incident. But they're probably just that, legends. The mountain is dangerous for natural reasons, not supernatural ones. Part 47. Soviet Mountaineering Culture. The hiking movement. In the Soviet Union, hiking and mountaineering were more than just recreational activities. They were political. They were patriotic. They were part of building the new Soviet man. The government promoted hiking as a way to develop physical fitness, collective spirit, and love of the homeland. Expeditions were organized by factories, universities, and government agencies. Completing a difficult hike was a badge of honor. The Ural Polytechnical Institute had a strong hiking tradition. Its students regularly undertook expeditions of increasing difficulty, earning certifications along the way. The Dyatlov group was among the most accomplished hikers in the region. This culture emphasized self-reliance, technical skill, and physical endurance. It also emphasized following rules and procedures. The hikers were trained to handle emergencies, to make good decisions under pressure to survive, and yet they died. This raises troubling questions. If these experienced hikers could make such fatal mistakes, what hope is there for the rest of us? Are any of us really safe in the mountains? Part 48. The route design. Dyatlov's decisions. Igor Dyatlov designed the route himself. He was an experienced hiker and a radio engineering student. He understood logistics, timing, and navigation. The route they planned was ambitious. 190 miles across the most difficult terrain in the Urals, in winter, in some of the worst weather conditions of the year. Why choose February? Why attempt such a difficult route at the most dangerous time of year? One answer is practical. The group was made up of students who had to fit their expedition around their studies. February was a winter break. It was the only time they could all go. Another answer is hubris. They believed they could handle it. They were the best of the best. They had the skills, the equipment, the experience. What could go wrong? This is a common pattern in mountaineering tragedies. Experienced climbers take risks that novices wouldn't take. They believe their skills protect them. They underestimate the mountain. Dyatlov may have made the same mistake. His route was too ambitious. His campsite selection was wrong. His decisions that night were fatal. Part 49. The night of February 1st, weather conditions. The weather on the night of February 1st to 2nd, 1959 was brutal. Meteorologists have reconstructed the conditions based on historical data. Temperatures dropped to minus 25 to minus 30 degrees Celsius. With wind chill, it would have felt even colder. Wind speeds were extremely high. Some estimates suggest 20 to 30 meters per second, which is hurricane force. This created blizzard conditions with near zero visibility. Snow was falling heavily, adding to the accumulation and the difficulty of navigation. In these conditions, exposure can kill in minutes. Frostbite can set in almost instantly. Hypothermia can overcome even prepared individuals. The hikers were experienced. They knew these conditions. They had faced bad weather before. But this night was different. This night, something drove them out of their tent, into the snow, without adequate clothing. What could be so terrifying that it would make experienced hikers flee into these conditions? Part 50. The tent construction. Technical analysis. The tent the hikers used was a standard Soviet hiking tent, designed for 9 people. It would have provided shelter from the wind and snow, but it was not designed for the conditions they faced. The tent was erected on an open slope, without any natural windbreaks. The slope had been cut to create a level surface, which may have destabilized the snow. In strong winds, a tent can be destroyed. The fabric can tear, the poles can break, the tent can collapse. The hikers had cut their way out of the tent. This suggests the tent was still standing when they fled, but they couldn't use the entrance. They had to cut through the fabric to escape. What was blocking the entrance? Could it have been snow? Could it have been wind? Could it have been something else? This is one of the key technical questions of the case. Understanding the tent's condition might explain why they left. Part 51. The footprints, what they tell us. The footprints in the snow tell a story. They show where the hikers went, how they moved, and in what order. The footprints leading from the tent to the tree were made by people walking at a normal pace, not running. This challenges the theory that they were fleeing in panic. If they were running from an immediate threat, their footprints would show it. The footprints show that some hikers were barefoot, some had one shoe, some had socks only. This suggests they left the tent in a hurry, grabbing whatever was closest. The footprints show the hikers splitting into groups. 2 went to the tree. 3 tried to return to the tent. 4 went deeper into the forest. Each group made different decisions. Each faced different fates. The footprints also show where the hikers stopped. Some fell, some lay down. Some kept going until they couldn't go any further. The footprints are evidence. They're the closest thing we have to seeing what happened that night. Part 52. The fire at the pine tree. At the pine tree, the hikers built a fire. Evidence of this was found by the searchers: charred wood, ash, the remains of a small blaze. Why did they stop here? The pine tree would have provided some shelter from the wind. A fire would have provided some warmth. But a small fire in those conditions would have been almost useless. The temperature was too low, the wind too strong. A fire might provide comfort, but it wouldn't save your life. The two hikers found at the tree, Doroshenko and Krivonishenko, were in their underwear. They had clearly given up on survival. They were waiting for death. The three who tried to return to the tent had slightly more clothing. They had hope. They thought they could make it. They were wrong. Part 53. The choice to split up. One of the most puzzling aspects of the incident is why the hikers split up. They were in a survival situation. They needed to stay together. In extreme cold, there's safety in numbers. Multiple bodies generate more heat. Multiple minds can make better decisions. Multiple pairs of eyes can find the way. But the hikers split into 3 groups. 2 at the tree, 3 trying to return, 4 going deeper into the forest. Why? One possibility is that they were confused. Infrasound, panic, hypothermia. Any of these could have affected their judgment. They might not have been thinking clearly. Another possibility is that they had different goals. Some wanted to return to the tent. Some wanted to find shelter in the forest. Some wanted to build a fire. A third possibility is that they were trying to increase their chances. By splitting up, at least some might survive. If they all stayed together and died, no one would live to tell the story. This is a common survival strategy. In some situations, splitting up improves overall survival chances, but in this case, it didn't help. Part 54. The last group, what happened in the ravine. The 4 hikers who went deeper into the forest were found in a ravine, under 4 meters of snow. They were the last to be found, 2 months later. They were better dressed than the others. They had taken clothing from the bodies of those who had died earlier. This shows they were thinking, planning, trying to survive. They had tried to build a shelter. They had tried to dig into the snow for protection from the wind. What killed them? The official theory is that they were caught in an avalanche or snowslide. The weight of the snow collapsed their shelter and buried them. But there's another theory. They dug too deep. They created a hollow under the snow which collapsed under their weight. They were trapped, unable to dig themselves out, and suffocated. Either way, they died under the snow, in the dark, far from help. Their bodies showed traumatic injuries. These could have been caused by the collapse, by falls, or by the pressure of the snow above them. Part 55. The condition of the bodies, months later. The first 5 bodies were found in February and March, within a month of the incident. They were relatively well preserved by the cold. The last 4 bodies were found in May, 2 months later. They had been under 4 meters of snow for all that time. When found, these bodies were badly decomposed. The soft tissue damage to their faces and heads was attributed to animals and water. The condition of Dubinina's body was particularly disturbing. She was missing her tongue, her eyes, part of her lips, and a fragment of her skull bone. Forensic experts judged that this damage happened after death. The bodies were in water, which could have caused this. Animals could have contributed. This is a gruesome detail, but it's important for understanding what happened. It suggests the bodies were not found immediately. It suggests the last hikers died somewhere that water could reach them. Part 56. The post-mortem reports. Detailed findings. The forensic reports from the autopsies are detailed technical documents. Let's look at some of the key findings. For the 5 who died of hypothermia, the reports show they were inadequately dressed. They had signs of frostbite. Their internal organs showed changes consistent with exposure. For the 3 who died of traumatic injuries, the reports show massive internal damage without corresponding external wounds. This is unusual. It's not consistent with falls, with attacks, or with any normal cause. One theory is that the pressure of the snow caused these injuries. When buried under 4 meters, the weight could be enormous. It could compress the chest, fracture ribs, cause internal bleeding. But this is just a theory. We don't know for certain. Part 57. The Search Operation. Massive effort. When the hikers failed to return, a massive search operation was mounted. This was the Soviet Union. They could mobilize resources in a way that other countries couldn't. Initially, it was volunteers, students and teachers from the institute. Then it became army and police with planes and helicopters. The search covered a huge area. The hikers could have been anywhere along their planned route. When the tent was found, the search narrowed. The footprints in the snow provided a trail to follow. Finding the first bodies was difficult. Finding the last 4 was even more difficult, requiring spring thaw and careful excavation. The search operation lasted months. It cost huge resources, and it ended without clear answers. Part 58. The Files. What was hidden? Soviet investigations produced extensive files. These included forensic reports, witness statements, technical analyses, and administrative documents. For decades, these files were classified. The public couldn't access them. The families couldn't access them. In the 1990s, some files were declassified. In the 2000s, more became available. Today, there's a significant amount of information accessible to researchers. But there are still gaps. Some documents may have been destroyed. Some information may have been suppressed. Some questions may never be answered. The files tell us a lot, but they don't tell us everything. Part 59. The Family's Grief. Generations of Questions. The families of the victims have lived with this tragedy for more than 60 years. They've raised questions, demanded answers, and fought for justice. Some family members have become investigators themselves. They've studied the files, visited the site, and formed their own theories. Others have tried to move on. They've built lives, raised children, tried to find closure. But the questions remain. What would the victims have become? What contributions would they have made to society? We'll never know. The family's grief is a human dimension to this case. It's not just a mystery to be solved. It's a tragedy to be mourned. Part 60. The Impact on Search and Rescue. The Dyatlov Pass incident changed how search and rescue operations are conducted in Russia and around the world. The case highlighted the importance of emergency communication. The hikers had no way to call for help. If they'd had a radio, they might have survived. The case emphasized the importance of proper equipment. The hikers had inadequate clothing for emergency conditions. If they'd had more, they might have survived. The case taught lessons about decision-making in emergencies. The hikers made choices that led to their deaths. If they'd made different choices, they might have survived. These lessons have been incorporated into training programs. They've saved lives in the decades since. But they couldn't save the Dyatlov group. Part 61. Similar Incidents, Lessons Not Learned. Tragically, similar incidents have occurred since 1959. The Kamar-Daban incident in 1993 killed 6 Russian hikers under similarly mysterious circumstances. In that case, the hikers were experienced. They had proper equipment. They knew the area. And still, they died. The pattern is similar. Experienced hikers, bad decisions, fatal outcomes. The mountains don't care about experience or equipment. They can still kill. Each incident is a reminder of the dangers of the wilderness. Each incident teaches lessons that seem obvious in hindsight, but are easily forgotten. Part 62. The Conspiracy Theories. From Mild to Wild. The Dyatlov Pass incident has attracted conspiracy theories ranging from plausible to absurd. At the more plausible end, military exercises, radiation, government cover-up. These theories are based on real evidence. The radiation, the orange spheres, the suppressed information. They haven't been proven, but they're not crazy. At the less plausible end, alien abduction, time travel, government mind control. These theories ignore the evidence and rely on speculation and imagination. Some conspiracy theories have been promoted by people who stand to profit from them. Authors, documentary makers, video game designers. They've created their own versions of the story, often with significant liberties taken. It's important to separate fact from fiction. The evidence is limited, but it's real. The theories are many, but most are not supported by evidence. Part 63. What we know for certain. Let's end with what we know for certain, independent of theories. 9 experienced hikers died on February 1st to 2nd, 1959, on Ural Mountain in the northern Urals. They died under mysterious circumstances that are still debated today. Their tent was found slashed from the inside. Their footprints led away from the tent into the snow. 5 died of hypothermia. 3 died of traumatic injuries, skull fracture, chest trauma. 1 died of hypothermia but was found with the others. Their bodies were found over a period of months. The last 4 were found under deep snow in a ravine. The Soviet investigation concluded it was a compelling natural force. Modern investigations have suggested avalanche, but questions remain. This is what we know. This is fact. Everything else is interpretation. Part 64. What we'll never know. And now, let's consider what we'll never know. We'll never know exactly what happened in that tent that night. We're dependent on evidence and inference, not witnesses. We'll never know what the hikers were thinking. Their diaries end before the incident. Their last thoughts are lost. We'll never know why they made the decisions they made. We can hypothesize, but we'll never be certain. We'll never know if they suffered. We hope they died quickly, but we can't know. We'll never know if they could have been saved. Perhaps not, but perhaps a different decision, a different choice, would have changed everything. These are the uncertainties that make the case so frustrating and so compelling. Part 65. Final thoughts. Why this story matters. As we reach the end of this deep dive, let's consider why this story matters. It matters because 9 people died, and their families still want answers. It matters because lessons can be learned that might save future lives. It matters because we, as humans, want to understand the world around us, and some mysteries resist understanding. It matters because it's a good story. It's dramatic, tragic, mysterious. It has heroes, the experienced hikers, antagonists, the mountain, and an unsolved ending. And it matters because it reminds us of our vulnerability. We like to think we're in control, that our skills protect us, that we're safe. The Dyatlov Pass incident shows us that's not always true. We're all one bad decision, one moment of bad luck, one turn of fate away from tragedy. This is Permanent Underclass. This is the story we tell to remind ourselves that the world is stranger and more dangerous than we think. I'll see you next time, if you dare. Sweet dreams. Part 66. The 1959 investigation, Lev Ivanov's role. Let's examine the lead investigator, Lev Nikitich Ivanov, and his role in the case. Ivanov was a former police officer who led the official inquest in 1959. He was responsible for gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and determining the cause of death. In 1990, he published an article admitting that the investigation team had no rational explanation for the incident. This was a remarkable admission from a Soviet official. Admitting failure was not common in the USSR. Ivanov also stated that his team had reported seeing flying spheres in the sky, but had received direct orders from high-ranking regional officials to dismiss this claim. This raises questions about what the authorities knew and when they knew it. What was Ivanov's role in suppressing information? Was he following orders? Or did he believe the spheres were irrelevant? We'll never know. Ivanov died in 2004, but his statements have fueled speculation ever since. Part 67. The 1959 autopsy process. Behind the scenes. The autopsies were conducted in the morgue of the N240 Central Hospital. The forensic experts were Boris Vozrozhdeny and Yuri Laptov, with supervision from senior forensic expert Genrietta Elisevna Cherkina. These were experienced professionals. They had conducted many autopsies. They knew what death looked like, but the Dyatlov deaths confused them. The injuries to Thibaut Brignol, Dubinina, and Zolotaryov were unlike anything they had seen before. Internal trauma without external wounds, massive force without corresponding damage. Vozrozhdeny famously stated that the force required would have been comparable to that of a car crash. This is an extraordinary comparison for a body found in the wilderness. The forensic team did their job. They documented their findings. They offered interpretations, but they couldn't explain everything. Part 68. The Soviet Context. Cold War Secrets. The Soviet Union in 1959 was a very different place than it is today. It was a closed society with limited contact to the outside world. Information was tightly controlled. The state decided what people could know. In this context, it's not surprising that the investigation was secretive. Many cases were classified. Many deaths were never fully explained. But the Dyatlov case went beyond normal Soviet secrecy. The suppression of the orange sphere sightings, the quick closure of the investigation, the classification of files, these suggest something more was going on. Was the Soviet government hiding a military test? Were they concerned about international embarrassment? Did they simply not know what happened and prefer to avoid admitting it? We may never know. The relevant files may still be classified. The officials who knew the truth are mostly dead. Part 69. The 2019 Reopening. Political drama. When the Russian government reopened the investigation in 2019, it was a major event. The families had been pushing for this for decades. Finally, they were heard. But the process was not straightforward. The investigation was led by Andrei Kuryakov, a deputy prosecutor. He had to navigate bureaucratic obstacles, political sensitivities, and conflicting evidence. The investigation concluded in 2020 with the avalanche theory. But this didn't satisfy everyone. The families felt their questions hadn't been answered. Researchers felt the evidence was inadequate. The reopening also raised questions about why it took so long. Why did the families have to fight for decades? Why wasn't the case reopened sooner? These are questions about the Russian legal system, about government accountability, about the handling of cold cases. Part 70. The 2021 Scientific Study, Methodology. The 2021 study by Puzrin and Gaume was a landmark in the scientific analysis of the case. But it was not without controversy. The researchers used computer modeling to simulate the avalanche scenario. They created a model of the mountain, the snow conditions, and the tent. They calculated forces, pressures, and trajectories. Their conclusion was that a slab avalanche could have created a pressure wave strong enough to damage the tent and cause the observed injuries. This was a new hypothesis, not previously considered by investigators, but some researchers criticized the study. They argued that the model's assumptions were questionable. They pointed out that the real-world conditions might not match the model's parameters. Science advances through debate and criticism. The 2021 study is not the final word. Future research may refine or reject its conclusions. Part 71. Comparing avalanche theories. Old versus new. The old avalanche theory and the new avalanche theory are different. The old theory, an avalanche buried the tent, forcing the hikers to flee. This was the 1959 conclusion, and it's what most people think of when they hear avalanche. The new theory, a slab avalanche created an air blast that damaged the tent without burying it. This is what Puzrin and Gaume proposed. It's a more subtle mechanism. The new theory explains some things the old theory didn't. It explains why the tent was damaged but not completely destroyed. It explains the traumatic injuries without requiring the hikers to be buried. But it still doesn't explain everything. Why were the hikers walking calmly if they thought an avalanche was happening? Why did they split up? Why did some undress while others dressed more warmly? The avalanche theories are the most scientifically rigorous, but they still don't provide complete answers. Part 72. The personal stories. Who were these people? Let's take a moment to remember the individuals who died. They were more than just victims of a mystery. They were real people with real stories. Igor Dyatlov was the leader. He was 23, studying radio engineering. He was ambitious, skilled, and determined. He had planned this expedition himself. He believed in his abilities. Yuri Doroshenko was 21. He was an experienced skier, popular among his peers. He had a bright future ahead of him. Lyudmila Dubinina was 20. She was one of only 2 women in the group. She was known for her strength and determination. Her death was particularly tragic. Georgy Krivonishenko was 23. He was called Yura by his friends. He had a carefree personality and many friends. Alexander Kolovatov was 24. He was the youngest in terms of experience, but still highly qualified. He was quiet and thoughtful. Zenaida Kolmogorova was 22. She was the other woman in the group. She was cheerful and optimistic. She had her whole life ahead of her. Rustem Slobodan was 23. He was a talented photographer. He documented the group's adventures. Nikolai Thibault Brignol was 23. He was working on his instructor's certification. He was serious about mountaineering. Semyon Zolotaryov was 38. He was the oldest, the most experienced. He had been climbing mountains for years. His presence in the group was unusual, and his background was somewhat mysterious. These were real people. They had families who loved them. They had futures that were taken. Part 73. The Diary's Last Words. The hikers kept diaries. These documents provide insight into their thoughts, their hopes, and their fears. The last entries were written on January 31st, the day before the fatal night. They describe the journey, the weather, the challenges. There's no hint of the tragedy to come. What would those diaries have contained if they had been written on February 1st or 2nd? We'll never know. The hikers didn't survive to record their final thoughts. The diaries are poignant documents. They remind us that these were real people, not just case files. They had ambitions, fears, and dreams. Part 74. What happened to the survivors? Yuri Yudin was the only member of the original group to survive. He left the expedition on January 28th due to health issues. What happened to him after the tragedy? He continued his studies and eventually became an engineer. He married, had children, built a life, but he never forgot his friends. He became active in the Dyatlov Foundation, working to preserve their memory and find answers. He gave many interviews, always willing to talk about the expedition and his lost friends. He died in 2013 at age 76. He never got the answers he was looking for. His story is a reminder that survivors carry a burden. He lived his whole life knowing that he could have died with his friends, but instead lived while they died. Part 75. The Memorials, Remembering the Dead. There are memorials to the Dyatlov group at the site and in Yekaterinburg. In Yekaterinburg, there's a tomb at the Mikhailovsko Cemetery where several of the victims are buried. It's a place of remembrance for families and visitors. At the site, there's a prominent rock outcrop that serves as a memorial. It's about 500 meters to the east-southeast of the actual site of the final camp. Hikers and visitors come here to pay their respects. The mountain pass itself was named Dyatlov Pass in memory of the group, even though the incident occurred on the eastern slope of Kholat Syakhl. These memorials keep the memory alive. They remind us that this was a real tragedy, not just a mystery. Part 76. The Tourism Industry. Dyatlov Pass Tours. Today, there's a small tourism industry around the Dyatlov Pass. Hikers, mystery enthusiasts, and morbid tourists make the journey to the site. This is controversial. Some feel it's disrespectful to the dead. Others see it as a way to remember them and understand what happened. The journey is difficult. The area is remote, the weather is harsh, the terrain is challenging. Only experienced hikers should attempt it. But those who make the journey say it's a powerful experience. Standing on the mountain, in the silence, you can feel the weight of what happened there. Part 77. The Media Portrayals, Books and Films. The Dyatlov Pass incident has been portrayed in numerous books, films, and documentaries. Let's look at some of the most notable. Donnie Icar's Dead Mountain, 2013, is one of the most famous English language accounts. Icar investigated the case and proposed the infrasound theory. The 2013 film Devil's Pass was a horror movie inspired by the incident. It took significant liberties with the story for dramatic effect. The 2015 video game Kholat is explicitly about the case. Players explore a fictional version of the site, uncovering clues and solving puzzles. Russian documentaries have also covered the case extensively. The 2000 documentary The Mystery of Dyatlov Pass was particularly influential. Each portrayal adds to the mythology. Each takes the facts and shapes them into a story. Part 78. The Psychological Dimension. Why we need answers. Why do we, as humans, need to solve mysteries like this? What's the psychological drive that makes us keep searching? One answer is that we have a need for closure. We want to know what happened. We want to understand. The not knowing is painful. Another answer is that we learn from these cases. Understanding what went wrong helps us avoid similar tragedies in the future. A third answer is that we're curious. We're programmed to seek patterns, to solve puzzles, to understand our world. Mysteries are like puzzles waiting to be solved. The Dyatlov Pass incident satisfies all these needs. It's a puzzle we want to solve. It teaches lessons we want to learn. And it provides closure, eventually, when we accept that some mysteries can't be solved. Part 79. What would you do? Survival scenarios. Let's put ourselves in the hiker's position. What would we have done? We're in a tent on a mountain. It's snowing, windy, and cold. Something has gone wrong. We need to decide, stay or go. If we stay, we might be buried. We might be trapped. We might die anyway. If we go, we face the cold. We're inadequately dressed. We might get lost. We might fall. We might die anyway. This is an impossible choice. There's no right answer. There's only the choice you make in the moment, with the information you have, under the pressure of the situation. We'd like to think we'd make the right choice, but we won't know until we're there. Part 80. The importance of proper equipment. One lesson from the Dyatlov case is the importance of proper equipment. The hikers had adequate equipment for a normal expedition, but not for an emergency. They had a tent, but it wasn't designed for the conditions they faced. They had sleeping bags, but they couldn't retrieve them. They had clothing, but they didn't have time to put it on. Modern hiking equipment is much better than what was available in 1959. We have better tents, better sleeping bags, better clothing. We have communication devices, GPS, emergency beacons, but even with the best equipment, we can still die. The mountain doesn't care about our gear. The lesson is not just to have equipment, but to know how to use it, to anticipate emergencies, to make good decisions under pressure. Part 81. The role of group dynamics. The hikers were a group. They had to make decisions together, survive together, die together, some of them. Group dynamics can be both positive and negative in survival situations. On the positive side, groups can provide warmth, support, and multiple perspectives. On the negative side, groups can experience conflict, panic, and poor decision-making. In this case, the group seems to have functioned reasonably well initially. They made decisions together, divided tasks, supported each other. But at the critical moment, they split up. This may have been the wrong decision. If they had stayed together, some might have survived. Group dynamics are complex. We can't know what we would have done in their situation. Part 82. The nature of fear. What scared them. One of the most puzzling aspects of the case is what scared the hikers enough to flee the tent. What could be so terrifying that they would choose certain death outside over the possibility of survival inside? We can only speculate. The possibilities include a real avalanche. The sound of snow moving might have convinced them they were about to be buried. Infrasound. The psychological effects of low-frequency sound might have caused panic. A predator. A wolf or bear might have approached the tent. A human threat. Perhaps they thought someone was approaching. A supernatural threat. Some have suggested they saw something they couldn't explain. We don't know. We'll never know. But the fear was real. It drove them to make fatal decisions. Part 83. The role of luck in survival. Survival often comes down to luck. The right decision at the wrong time can kill you. The wrong decision at the right time can save you. The Dyatlov hikers made what might be considered wrong decisions. They camped on an exposed slope. They fled the tent. They split up. They didn't stay together. But with a little luck, a break in the weather, a clearer path, a better decision at a critical moment, some might have survived. We like to think that good decisions lead to survival and bad decisions lead to death. But it's not that simple. Sometimes it's just luck. This is humbling. It reminds us that we're not fully in control. Part 84. The mystery in popular culture. The Dyatlov Pass incident has become a touchstone in popular culture. It's referenced in music, literature, art, and more. The case represents something beyond its specific facts. It represents the mystery of the unknown, the danger of the wilderness, the fragility of human life. People who have never heard of the Ural Mountains know the name Dyatlov Pass. It's become synonymous with unsolved mystery. This is both good and bad. Good because it keeps the memory of the victims alive. Bad because it encourages sensationalism and conspiracy theories. Part 85. What would solve this case? What evidence would be needed to solve this case definitively? New documents from the Soviet archives. If there are files that haven't been released, they might contain crucial information. Forensic re-examination. If the preserved tissue samples still exist, modern DNA analysis might reveal something new. Witness testimony. Someone who was there, who knows something, who hasn't come forward. But this is unlikely after 65 years. A confession. Someone who knows the truth decides to reveal it, but without new evidence, we'll have to be satisfied with the best theories we have, and those theories may never be proven. Part 86. Final conclusions. Where we stand. Where do we stand today, after all this investigation and analysis? We know that 9 experienced hikers died on February 1st to 2nd, 1959, under mysterious circumstances. We know the official cause of death, 6 from hypothermia, 3 from traumatic injuries. We know the official explanation, a compelling natural force. We know the leading theory, an avalanche, possibly a slab avalanche, that forced them to flee. We know there are questions that haven't been answered, inconsistencies that haven't been resolved, theories that haven't been proven. We know that this case will remain unsolved, at least for now. The evidence is too old, the witnesses are gone, the files may never be fully revealed. This is the reality of cold cases. Sometimes we don't get answers. Part 87. The lesson for today. What lesson can we take from the Dyatlov Pass incident? Respect nature. The mountains are beautiful but dangerous. They don't care about our skills, our equipment, or our experience. Prepare for emergencies. We never know when things might go wrong. Having the right equipment and knowledge can save our lives. Make good decisions. In a crisis, we need to think clearly. We need to weigh the risks and benefits of each choice. Accept uncertainty. Sometimes, despite our best efforts, things go wrong. We can't control everything. The Dyatlov hikers did their best. They were experienced, prepared, and skilled. And still they died. This could happen to any of us. Part 88. A personal reflection. As I conclude this deep dive into the Dyatlov Pass incident, I'm struck by the human dimension of this tragedy. 9 people went into the mountains full of hope and excitement. They were looking forward to adventure, achievement, and accomplishment. Instead, they found death. Their bodies were found over months, scattered across the mountain, preserved by the cold, but marked by tragedy. Their families never fully recovered. The survivors carried guilt, the investigators carried doubt, and the rest of us are left with questions that may never be answered. This is a reminder of how fragile life is, how quickly things can go wrong, how important it is to cherish every moment. Part 89. The Enduring Mystery. The Dyatlov Pass incident will endure as one of the great unsolved mysteries of our time. It will continue to attract researchers, writers, and filmmakers. It will continue to generate theories and debates. It will continue to remind us of the limits of human understanding. The mountain still stands. The snow still falls. The mystery remains. We'll keep searching for answers even when answers may not exist. We'll keep telling the story even when the story can't be fully told. This is Permanent Underclass. This is the kind of story we explore. The weird, the dark, the unexplained. I'll see you next time, if you dare. Sweet dreams. Part 90. The Cold War Context, Espionage and Secrecy in 1959. The year 1959 was a pivotal time in the Cold War. The Soviet Union and the United States were locked in a tense standoff, each trying to outdo the other in technology, military power, and global influence. In this environment, secrecy was paramount. The Soviet government was extremely protective of information, especially anything that might embarrass the state or reveal weaknesses. This context is essential for understanding how the Dyatlov case was handled. The government had incentives to suppress information, to control the narrative, to avoid admitting that something had gone wrong. Was there a military dimension to the case? Some researchers believe the Soviet Union was conducting secret tests in the Urals, possibly nuclear tests, possibly weapons tests, possibly something else entirely. The orange spheres seen in the sky could have been test aircraft or missiles. The radiation on some clothing could have been from a nuclear test site. This theory is attractive because it explains the secrecy. If the hikers stumbled onto a military secret, the government would have strong reasons to suppress the truth. But there's no direct evidence for this theory. The military tests that are known to have occurred don't match the timeline or location of the incident. Part 91, The Medical Evidence. A deeper look. Let's take a closer look at the medical evidence because it's central to understanding what happened. The 5 hikers who died of hypothermia showed classic signs: pale or cyanotic skin, rigor mortis in positions suggesting they had tried to warm themselves, internal changes consistent with prolonged cold exposure. These deaths were relatively straightforward. They froze to death. But the 3 hikers who died of traumatic injuries tell a different story. Their injuries were Nikolai Thibault Brignol, major skull damage. The skull was fractured in multiple places, with damage to the brain, no external wounds. Lyudmila Dubinina, severe chest trauma. Multiple ribs were broken, the chest was collapsed. The heart and lungs were damaged, no external wounds. Semyon Zolotaryov, similar chest trauma. The force was enormous, comparable to a car crash. The forensic expert, Vozrojdeny, was clear. These injuries could not have been caused by a human attacker. The force was too great, the damage too internal. What could cause such injuries? The leading theory is pressure, either from an avalanche, from falling, or from the weight of snow, but none of these explanations is entirely satisfactory. Part 92. The environmental conditions, more details. The weather conditions that night were extreme, even by Ural standards. Temperatures. The official records show a low of minus 30 degrees Celsius, minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. But some estimates suggest it could have been as low as minus 40 degrees Celsius, minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind chill. Wind. The wind was strong, sustained, and gusty. Estimates suggest speeds of 20 to 30 meters per second, 45 to 67 miles per hour, which qualifies as hurricane force. This created blizzard conditions with near zero visibility. Snow. Heavy snowfall had occurred in the days before the incident, creating deep accumulations. The wind was also drifting the snow, creating unstable conditions. Atmosphere. The air was cold and dry, which actually increases the danger. Cold, dry air doesn't hold heat well, and it can cause rapid evaporation of moisture from the skin, leading to frostbite. In these conditions, exposure can kill in minutes. A person without proper clothing could suffer fatal hypothermia in a very short time. Part 93, The Search Dogs, What They Found. Search dogs were used during the investigation. They helped locate bodies that might have been missed. Dogs can track human scent even under snow. They can detect bodies buried several meters deep. They're invaluable in search and rescue operations. In this case, the dogs helped locate the last 4 bodies, which were buried under 4 meters of snow. Without dogs, these bodies might not have been found until the spring thaw. The dogs also confirmed what the footprints suggested. There were no other human tracks in the area. The hikers were alone that night. This rules out the theory that they were attacked by another person or group. The only prints were theirs. Part 94. The Soviet Response, Bureaucracy and Secrecy. The Soviet response to the incident reveals a lot about how the government operated in 1959. First, there was a delay in reporting. The hikers were expected to return by February 12th. When they didn't, their families waited several days before raising the alarm. By the time rescue efforts began, valuable time had been lost. Second, the investigation was handled by multiple agencies: the police, the army, the prosecutor's office. This created bureaucratic complexity and potential for information to be lost or distorted. Third, the files were quickly classified. The investigation was officially closed in May 1959, and the files were sent to a secret archive. This prevented public scrutiny or independent investigation. Fourth, when the case was reopened in 2019, the same bureaucratic obstacles appeared. The families had to fight for decades to get any action. This pattern is characteristic of Soviet and post-Soviet governance. Information is hoarded, not shared. Bureaucracy takes precedence over compassion. Part 95. The Role of Propaganda, Soviet Narratives. The Soviet government was always concerned about narratives. They wanted to control how events were portrayed, both domestically and internationally. In this case, they had an interest in presenting the hikers as heroes who died in service of their country, rather than as victims of a tragedy that might reflect poorly on Soviet competence. This is why the final report used the vague phrase, "a compelling natural force." It's dramatic, heroic language. It suggests the hikers were battling nature and lost, rather than making mistakes or being caught in something inexplicable. The families were also pressured to accept this narrative. They were told not to ask too many questions. They were given limited information. This manipulation of the truth has made it harder to understand what actually happened. The original evidence was compromised by political considerations. Part 96. The Modern Relevance, Lessons for Today. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains relevant today in several ways. For hikers and outdoor enthusiasts, it's a reminder of the dangers of the wilderness. Even experienced professionals can make fatal mistakes. Proper preparation, respect for nature, and good judgment are essential. For researchers, it's an example of how difficult it can be to solve cold cases. Evidence degrades, witnesses die, documents are lost or suppressed. Sometimes, mysteries remain unsolved. For the public, it's a cautionary tale about the limits of our understanding. We like to think we can explain everything, but sometimes we can't. Sometimes the best we can do is accept uncertainty. The case also reminds us of the human cost of adventure. 9 people went into the mountains. They didn't come back. Their families grieved and continue to grieve. Part 97. What other evidence might exist? Is there other evidence that might still be discovered? Potentially, yes. Some files may not have been declassified. Some physical evidence may still exist in archives or evidence rooms. In recent years, there have been calls to release all remaining classified documents. So far, these calls have gone largely unanswered. There might also be witness testimony that hasn't been considered. People who were in the area at the time, who saw something, who know something. But after 65 years, most potential witnesses are dead. New forensic techniques might reveal something in the preserved tissue samples, if they still exist. But this seems unlikely after so much time. The most likely scenario is that no new evidence will emerge. The case will remain unsolved. Part 98. comparing Soviet and Western investigation methods. The investigation of this case was typical of Soviet methods. It was centralized, secretive, and focused on finding a convenient conclusion rather than the truth. In contrast, Western investigations tend to be more open, with greater public access to information and more independent oversight. This difference has implications for how we understand the case. The Soviet investigation may have missed evidence, overlooked leads, or suppressed information that didn't fit the narrative. Western researchers have approached the case with different assumptions and methods. They've proposed new theories and challenged old conclusions. But even with Western-style investigation, the case might remain unsolved. Some mysteries are just too old, too complex, too ambiguous. Part 99. The Legacy for Mountaineering Safety. Since 1959, mountaineering and hiking safety has improved dramatically. New equipment, better training, and improved emergency response have saved countless lives. The Dyatlov case has been studied in mountaineering schools around the world. It's used as a case study in decision-making, emergency response, and risk assessment. Specific lessons include the importance of proper campsite selection, the value of carrying emergency equipment, the need to recognize and respond to changing conditions, the dangers of group decision-making under stress, the importance of turning back when conditions deteriorate. These lessons have been incorporated into training programs and have become standard knowledge for outdoor enthusiasts. Part 100, Why I Made This Video, a personal note. I've spent hours researching this case. I've read dozens of books and articles. I've watched documentaries and listened to podcasts. I've studied maps, photographs, and forensic reports. Why? Because I'm fascinated by mysteries. Because I want to understand what happened. Because I believe these stories deserve to be told. The Dyatlov Pass incident is more than just a puzzle. It's a human tragedy. 9 people died, and their families still want answers. By making this video, I hope to honor their memory. I hope to keep their story alive. I hope to contribute to the ongoing conversation about what happened. I don't have all the answers. No one does. But I can present the evidence, explain the theories, and let you decide what you believe. That's what Permanent Underclass is about. Exploring the unexplained, the mysterious, the unsettling. Part 101. The final word on theories. Let's summarize where we stand on the main theories. The avalanche theory, most widely accepted. The hikers were forced to flee by an approaching avalanche, either real or perceived. This explains why they left the tent. It also explains the traumatic injuries in some of the hikers. The infrasound theory. The hikers were panicked by low-frequency sound that caused psychological distress. This explains the irrational behavior, but not the injuries. The military theory. The hikers were caught in a military exercise, possibly involving parachute mines or other weapons. This explains the secrecy and some of the strange evidence, but there's no definitive proof. The supernatural theory. Something unexplained occurred. A UFO, a spirit, a Yeti. This satisfies our desire for a dramatic explanation, but there's no evidence to support it. My personal assessment. The avalanche theory is the most likely, but it doesn't explain everything. The case may never be fully solved. Part 102. What would change my mind? What evidence would change my mind about this case? New documents from Soviet archives that definitively explain what happened. Forensic analysis that reveals a cause of death that matches all the evidence. A credible witness testimony that provides a new perspective. Confession from someone who knows the truth. But none of this is likely. The case is too old. The evidence is too degraded. The witnesses are gone. We'll have to live with uncertainty. We'll have to accept that we may never know. This is hard for us as humans. We want closure. We want answers. We want to understand. But sometimes understanding isn't possible. Sometimes we have to accept what we can't know. Part 103, Closing Reflections. As I bring this video to a close, I'm thinking about the families of the Dyatlov hikers. They lost loved ones in the most tragic circumstances. They've spent decades seeking answers. They've fought for truth, for justice, for memory. I hope this video has done justice to their story. I hope it has honored their loved ones. I hope it has contributed to understanding. To the families, I'm sorry for your loss. I hope you eventually get the answers you seek. To the viewers, thank you for watching. I hope you've learned something. I hope you've been entertained. I hope you've been reminded of the fragility of life and the importance of safety. This has been Permanent Underclass. I'm Andrew. I'll see you next time. If you dare. Sweet dreams. Part 104, The Language Barrier. Russian Sources and Translation. One of the challenges in this case is accessing Russian sources. Most of the original documents, witness statements, and forensic reports are in Russian. For decades, Western researchers had limited access to these materials. Translations were rare, and those that existed were often incomplete or inaccurate. In recent years, this has changed. More documents have been translated. More researchers have visited Russia. More information has become available. But there's still a language barrier. Many key documents have not been translated. Many witnesses have never been interviewed in English. This means that our understanding of the case is incomplete. There may be crucial evidence that we don't know about simply because we can't read it. Future research will need to overcome this barrier. We'll need more translators, more collaboration, more access to Russian archives. Part 105, The Role of the Internet, Crowdsolving the Mystery. The Internet has transformed how we investigate mysteries like this. Online forums, social media, and video sharing platforms have allowed researchers around the world to share information, debate theories, and collaborate on analysis. The Dyatlov case has a particularly active online community. Reddit threads, YouTube videos, and specialized forums are full of people discussing the case. Some of this work has been valuable. Researchers have translated documents, identified witnesses, and proposed new theories. But there's also a downside. Misinformation spreads quickly. Confirmed facts get mixed with speculation. Conspiracy theories flourish. We need to be critical of what we read online. We need to verify sources, check facts, and avoid jumping to conclusions. The internet can help us solve mysteries, but it can also perpetuate errors. Part 106, The Forensic Evidence. A critical review. Let's do a critical review of the forensic evidence. The autopsies were conducted by qualified professionals. The findings were documented in detail. The reports are available for review. But there are limitations. The bodies had been frozen, then thawed, then preserved. This may have affected the evidence. The forensic science of 1959 was less advanced than today. Modern techniques might reveal more. The investigators were under pressure to reach a conclusion quickly. This may have affected their analysis. Some evidence may have been lost or damaged in the intervening years. Given these limitations, the forensic evidence should be viewed as suggestive rather than definitive. It points towards certain conclusions but doesn't prove them. Part 107. The Psychological Autopsy, What Went Wrong in Their Minds. A psychological autopsy tries to reconstruct what someone was thinking before they died. This can help us understand their decisions. In this case, we can make some inferences. The hikers were experienced and confident. They had completed difficult expeditions before. They believed in their abilities. This confidence may have led them to take risks. They may have chosen a more dangerous route. a more exposed campsite, a more ambitious schedule. When the crisis hit, they responded in different ways. Some tried to return to the tent. Some tried to find shelter. Some stayed together. Some split up. These responses reflect different personalities, different assessments of the situation, different levels of panic. It's impossible to know exactly what each hiker was thinking, but we can try to understand their mindset. Part 108, the financial cost, investigation and recovery. The search and recovery operation was expensive. It involved military resources, police resources, volunteer resources. It lasted months. In today's dollars, the cost would be millions. In 1959 Soviet rubles, it was also substantial. This was not a minor incident. It was a national event. The government took it seriously. The cost of the investigation has implications for how we approach similar cases today. Should we invest this much in search and rescue? Are the resources worth it? These are difficult questions, but they're worth considering. Part 109, the role of the military. Why were they involved? The Soviet military became involved in the search because the hikers were civilians. This was standard procedure, but there may have been another reason. The military had resources that could help. They had aircraft, they had communication equipment, they had personnel who could operate in harsh conditions. The military also had an interest in the case because it involved the northern Urals, a strategically sensitive area. Their involvement helped find the bodies, but it also added another layer of bureaucracy and secrecy to the investigation. The military presence may have influenced how the case was handled. They may have had priorities that differed from the family's priorities. Part 110, the political dimension, Khrushchev and the thaw. The incident occurred during a particular political period in the Soviet Union. Nikita Khrushchev was in power, and the Khrushchev thaw was in full swing. This was a period of relative openness compared to Stalin's era. There was more cultural exchange with the West, more discussion of social issues, more tolerance for dissent. But the government was still sensitive about embarrassing incidents. They didn't want to admit that something had gone wrong. The Dyatlov case was an embarrassment. 9 young people had died on a mountain, and the government couldn't fully explain why. This may have motivated the secrecy and the quick conclusion. They wanted to move on, to forget, to avoid discussion. Part 111, the academic community, scientific analysis. The academic community has contributed significantly to our understanding of this case. Geologists have studied the avalanche risk. Meteorologists have analyzed the weather. Physicists have modeled the infrasound hypothesis. Engineers have examined the tent design. This research has been valuable. It's helped us understand what might have happened. But the academic approach has limitations. Researchers are often far from the scene. They work with documents and data, not direct observation. They may have biases toward their own theories. The best research is collaborative, involving both scientists and local experts. It combines theory with practice. Part 112. The ethics of true crime. Respecting the victims. This is a true crime story. It involves real people who really died. Their families are still alive. We need to approach this topic with sensitivity. We need to remember that these were real people, not just characters in a story. Their families have asked that their memory be honored. They want respect, not sensationalism. As content creators, we have a responsibility to be ethical. We should present the facts accurately. We should avoid speculation that could be harmful. We should consider the impact on the families. This is a difficult balance. We want to tell an engaging story, but we also want to be respectful. I hope I've achieved that balance in this video. Part 113. The future of the case. What comes next? The case will continue to attract interest. Researchers will continue to investigate. Theories will continue to be proposed. But the likelihood of a definitive solution is low. The evidence is too old, the witnesses are gone, the documents may never be released. The case will become history. It will be studied in schools, discussed in documentaries, referenced in books. Future generations will know about the Dyatlov Pass incident. They'll see it as a mysterious tragedy, a cautionary tale, an unsolved mystery. This is probably the best we can hope for, not answers but remembrance. Part 114. Similar cases worldwide. A pattern. The Dyatlov Pass incident is not unique. Similar cases have occurred around the world. In the United States, there's the Yuba County 5, 1978. 5 men died under mysterious circumstances in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Their vehicle was found, but they weren't. Some were found later, under strange circumstances. In Japan, there's the Himalayan expeditions that have ended in tragedy. In Europe, there are numerous cases of hikers dying in the Alps. Each case is different, but there are common themes: experienced hikers, unexpected weather, fatal decisions, unresolved mysteries. The Dyatlov case is the most famous, but it's part of a larger pattern of mountain tragedies. Part 115. The media coverage over time. How the story evolved. The media coverage of this case has evolved over time. In 1959, it was a brief news story in Soviet newspapers. The details were limited. The explanation was vague. In the 1990s, after the Soviet collapse, more information emerged. Books were published, documentaries were made, the case became internationally known. In the 2000s and 2010s, the internet amplified coverage. YouTube videos, Reddit discussions, and online articles spread the story widely. In 2019 to 2021, the case was revived by the Russian investigation and the scientific study. New articles, new videos, new debates. Each phase has added to our understanding, but also to the mythology. Part 116. The financial cost of the tragedy. In human terms. Beyond the investigation costs, there were human costs to this tragedy. The families lost loved ones. They spent decades seeking answers. They fought for recognition, for justice, for memory. The survivors carried guilt. Yuri Yudin lived the rest of his life wondering if he could have done something. The investigators carried doubt. They knew they didn't have all the answers. The community carried fear. For years, hikers were wary of the northern Urals. These human costs are often overlooked in our focus on the mystery, but they're important. Part 117. The physical evidence. What remains? What physical evidence still exists? The tent was not preserved. It was lost or destroyed. The clothing was examined, then returned to the families, or retained in evidence. Some items may still exist in archives. The bodies were buried, then exhumed for autopsy, then reburied. The remains may still exist for DNA analysis, but this seems unlikely after so much time. The diaries and photographs were published and are available. This is all that remains. It's not much, but it's enough to keep the investigation alive. Part 118. The political economy of search and rescue. Search and rescue is expensive. It requires resources, training, and coordination. In the Soviet Union, the military provided these resources. In modern Russia, it's a mix of government agencies, volunteers, and private companies. Internationally, the cost is shared between governments, insurance companies, and individuals. This creates ethical questions. Who should pay for search and rescue? Should hikers be required to carry insurance? Should there be limits on how much is spent? These are difficult questions, but they're worth discussing. Part 119. The Future of Mountaineering, Trends and Dangers. Mountaineering and hiking are becoming more popular. More people are going into the mountains than ever before. This is good in some ways. It connects people with nature, it promotes fitness, it builds community. But it's also dangerous. More people mean more accidents. More inexperienced people mean more mistakes. The Dyatlov case is a reminder of the risks. Even experienced hikers can die. Even well-planned expeditions can go wrong. The future of mountaineering depends on balancing the benefits and risks. We need to promote safety without discouraging adventure. Part 120. Final Reflections. The Weight of Mystery. As I conclude this comprehensive analysis, I'm struck by the weight of this mystery. It has been 65 years since 9 people died on a mountain in the Soviet Union. In that time, we've learned a lot. We've analyzed evidence, developed theories, and conducted research. And still, we don't know exactly what happened. This is humbling. It reminds us of the limits of our knowledge. It reminds us that some questions can't be answered. But it also reminds us of the value of curiosity. We keep asking questions because we want to understand. We keep investigating because we hope to find answers. This is what Permanent Underclass is about. We explore the mysterious, the unexplained, the unsettling. We may not find answers, but we keep looking. Part 121. Where to learn more. If you want to learn more about the Dyatlov Pass incident, here are some resources. Books. Dead Mountain by Donnie Icar is the most famous English language account. Russian language books include The Dyatlov Pass Tragedy by Anna Mikhailovskaya. Documentaries. The Mystery of Dyatlov Pass 2000 is a Russian documentary. Several English language documentaries are available on YouTube. Websites. The Dyatlov Foundation website has information in multiple languages. Reddit's r/Dyatlov Pass has an active community. Academic papers. The 2021 study by Puzrin and Gaum in Communications, Earth and Environment is available online. Part 122. A call to action. Stay safe out there. Before I go, I want to make a plea to anyone planning a hike or expedition. Be prepared. Know the conditions. Carry proper equipment. Have a plan for emergencies. The mountains are beautiful, but they're also dangerous. They don't care about our experience or our equipment. They can kill us in an instant. Learn from the Dyatlov case. Respect the mountain. Stay safe. Part 123. The Last Word. Thank you. Thank you for watching this comprehensive analysis of the Dyatlov Pass incident. I've tried to present the facts, the theories, and the questions. I've tried to be accurate, fair, and respectful. I hope you've learned something. I hope you've been engaged. I hope you'll remember the victims. This has been Permanent Underclass. I'm Andrew. I'll see you next time, if you dare. Sweet dreams. Part 124. The Meteorology. Weather patterns in the Urals. The weather in the northern Urals is influenced by several factors. The region sits at the boundary between Arctic and temperate climate zones, creating extreme variability. In winter, cold air from Siberia dominates, bringing clear skies and brutal temperatures. But when warm air from the Atlantic moves in, it can collide with the cold air, creating powerful storm systems. The Dyatlov incident occurred during a period of intense cold. Temperatures had dropped significantly in the days before the expedition. The group had experienced these conditions and thought they could handle them. What they didn't anticipate was the wind. The wind created the blizzard conditions, the low visibility, the wind chill that made temperatures even more dangerous. Meteorologists who have analyzed the data believe the weather was unusual, but not unprecedented. Similar conditions occur every few years in the northern Urals. This suggests that the hikers should have been prepared for these conditions. They had winter experience. They knew what cold weather could do. But knowing and responding are different things. In the moment when fear kicks in, even experienced hikers can make mistakes. Part 125. The Topography. Understanding the mountain. Kholat Shachel rises to about 1,200 meters above sea level. It's not particularly high by mountain standards, but it's exposed and windswept. The mountain has two main slopes, a western slope facing the Vishka River Valley and an eastern slope facing the Auspia River Valley. The incident occurred on the eastern slope. The terrain is alpine tundra, rocky with sparse vegetation. In winter, snow covers everything. The wind redistributes the snow, creating drifts and cornices. The pass between Kholat Shachel and the neighboring mountain is a natural corridor. It's been used by travelers for centuries. This was the route the hikers were taking. They knew the terrain. They'd studied maps and planned their route. But something went wrong. They ended up on the wrong slope, in the wrong place, at the wrong time. Part 126. The Snow Science. Avalanche Dynamics. Snow avalanches are complex phenomena. They're influenced by temperature, wind, snowfall, and the structure of the snowpack. In the northern Urals, the most common type of avalanche is the slab avalanche. This occurs when a layer of snow becomes cohesive and then slides on a weaker layer beneath. Slab avalanches are particularly dangerous because they can happen suddenly, without warning. The entire slope can release at once, burying anything in its path. The 2021 study by Puzrin and Gaum focused on this type of avalanche. They argued that a relatively small release could have created enough force to damage the tent without fully burying it. This is a plausible mechanism, but it's still just a theory. We can't know for certain if this is what happened. Part 127. The Physiology of Hypothermia. What happens to the body? Hypothermia is a medical emergency. It occurs when the body loses heat faster than it can produce it, causing core temperature to drop. The stages of hypothermia are mild hypothermia, 32 to 35 degrees Celsius, shivering, confusion, slurred speech. The body is still trying to generate heat. Moderate hypothermia, 28 to 32 degrees Celsius. Shivering stops, muscle weakness, loss of coordination, drowsiness. The body is losing the battle. Severe hypothermia, below 28 degrees Celsius. Loss of consciousness, shallow breathing, possible death. The body's systems are failing. In the Dyatlov case, the hikers were exposed to temperatures that could cause severe hypothermia in minutes, especially without proper clothing. The 5 who died of hypothermia likely went through these stages. It's a painful way to die. Part 128. The Paradoxical Undressing. Why victims remove clothing. One of the most disturbing aspects of hypothermia is paradoxical undressing. Victims sometimes remove their clothing, even in freezing temperatures. This happens because as the body cools, blood rushes to the extremities, creating a false sensation of warmth. The victim feels hot and removes clothing. It's a tragic phenomenon. The victim thinks they're helping themselves, but they're actually accelerating their death. In the Dyatlov case, some victims were found with minimal clothing. This could be evidence of paradoxical undressing, or it could be explained by other factors, taking clothing from the dead, fleeing in a hurry. We can't know for certain, but paradoxical undressing is a well-documented phenomenon that could explain some of the clothing evidence. Part 129. The Last Survivors. Their Final Hours. Let's think about what the last 4 hikers experienced. They were the most fortunate in terms of clothing, but they still died. They had taken clothing from the dead. They had tried to build a shelter. They had tried to survive. Then something collapsed. Perhaps their shelter. Perhaps the snow above them. Perhaps they fell. They were buried under 4 meters of snow. They couldn't dig themselves out. They suffocated. This is a terrible way to die. Trapped in the dark, under tons of snow, unable to move, unable to breathe. We can only hope their deaths were quick. We can only hope they didn't suffer. Part 130. The Families Fight for Answers. 60 Years of Persistence. The families of the Dyatlov hikers have fought for answers for over 60 years. They formed the Dyatlov Foundation to preserve their memory and seek the truth. They lobbied the government to reopen the investigation. They gave countless interviews telling their stories. This fight has been long and often frustrating. The government was unresponsive. The media lost interest. The public moved on. But the families never gave up. They kept pushing, kept asking, kept demanding. In 2019, their persistence paid off. The investigation was reopened. The government acknowledged the case needed review. Even when the results didn't satisfy them, they had achieved something. The case was no longer forgotten. Part 131. The International Dimension. Interest from around the world. The Dyatlov case has attracted international interest. Researchers from around the world have studied it, written about it, and debated it. This is unusual for a case that occurred in the Soviet Union in 1959. Most such cases are forgotten outside their immediate region. But the Dyatlov case has elements that transcend national boundaries. It's a human tragedy, it's a mystery, it's a cautionary tale. People in America, Europe, Asia, and Australia have learned about this case. They've formed their own theories. They've contributed to the discussion. This international interest keeps the case alive. It ensures the victims are remembered. It pushes for continued investigation. Part 132. The Psychology of Mystery. Why we can't let go. Why are we so fascinated by mysteries like this? Why can't we let go, accept uncertainty, move on? Psychologists have several theories. First, we have a need for closure. The human mind seeks resolution. Open questions feel uncomfortable. Second, we have a need for control. In a chaotic world, we want to believe we can understand and predict events. Mysteries threaten this belief. Third, we have a need for meaning. We want our lives to make sense. Mysteries challenge this sense. Fourth, we have a need for justice. When bad things happen to good people, we want explanations, want accountability. Mysteries deny us this satisfaction. The Dyatlov case satisfies all these needs. It's unresolved, challenging, meaningful, and unfair. It's the perfect mystery. Part 133. The Role of Speculation. When Theories Become Truth. In the absence of facts, speculation fills the gap. This is both helpful and dangerous. Helpful because speculation generates hypotheses. Some of these may be testable. They may lead to new evidence or insights. Dangerous because speculation can become accepted as truth. People hear a theory, find it compelling, and assume it's correct. This has happened with the Dyatlov case. The avalanche theory is widely accepted, but it's not proven. The infrasound theory is popular, but it's not proven. The military theory is dramatic, but it's not proven. We need to distinguish between what we know and what we think. We need to hold our theories lightly, always open to new evidence. Part 134. The Personal Impact. What this case has taught me. Making this video has taught me several things. First, I've learned about the limits of investigation. Some cases can't be solved no matter how much evidence we gather, how many theories we propose. Second, I've learned about the value of persistence. The family's fight for answers over 60 years is inspiring. They remind us that truth matters. Third, I've learned about the power of mystery. The Dyatlov case has attracted interest for 65 years. It's been studied, discussed, debated. It's become part of our cultural consciousness. Fourth, I've learned about the importance of respect. These were real people, with real families. We should honor their memory, not exploit it. Part 135. The Future of True Crime. Where do we go from here? True crime content is more popular than ever. Podcasts, videos, books, and TV shows explore mysteries around the world.